Hi, Ruby.
Hi, Natalie.
I'm so excited to chat with you on the podcast around everything death. It's really interesting. You were one of the first people last summer in 2022 that I first shared this intuitive hit of this idea of things that die, and we were talking, and I was like, yeah, let's do it, let's chat everything death when it happens. And it's been a year in the making of getting to this point, but yay. And I'm excited because year in the making, you also, yay.
Several years in the making.
Several years, three years, right?
3 years, yes.
Yeah, Women Without Kids.
Indeed.
Yeah. What a project, what a book, what an energy to face and deal with. And I bet it's been quite the journey uncovering. I guess the question I really want to ask is, has it created like a death of an identity? Like actually writing it down and actually doing the research, has it really brought through the death of identity of being a mother? As in, while you were writing it, were there like doubts, or did it bring up stuff that was like, oh shit, I've got to look at this? Was it a real like putting it down on paper in that creative process? Was it like the true death of the identity of mother for yourself in the traditional sense of mother and having children?
Well, the thing is, I never felt any connection to the identity of mother.
Yeah.
I think it was the death of me questioning my own intuition and instincts around not becoming a mother.
Yeah.
I knew that had always been my truth, and that was always the right path for me, and I questioned it incessantly. What's wrong with me? How can I make myself want this? I will want this at some point. If I just do it, I'm sure I'll love it. All of this. And writing, I mean, that had already started to die a death when I decided to write the book. And then doing the research and getting it all down on paper, diving into my own personal history, but then kind of mapping that against the kind of cultural forces that are influencing all of our decisions about whether or not to become parents, including our experiences of parenting, really put an end to that questioning. No, this is the right path for me. And it's interesting, something that has died a death as a result of writing this book is me feeling like an anomaly, or feeling like there's something wrong with me for not wanting to be a mother, for feeling like I'm the only one who's had this experience. Because what I've found is a growing community of women who feel the same as me, who have had the same questions as me, who've experienced the same self-doubt, same shame around this orientation towards non-motherhood. And so, yeah, I no longer feel like I'm the only one, and I no longer feel like there's something missing or something wrong with me, or I didn't get the memo. You know? But on the subject of, just as you was talking, one thing that really came through strongly was this idea, which I present in, I think it's in chapter 2 of the book, that something is ending with us when we don't have children. Something is dying, like our lineage is coming to an end with us when we decide not to procreate, or when circumstances mean that we're unable to continue our lineage. So that was really interesting to look at in depth when I was researching the book, and then sort of again looking at that in context of my own sort of personal story and my relationship to my ancestry and things like that.
Because I remember you writing in the book around how you were going to be like the last person of that name. And isn't it interesting how you associate again that like ancestry, family trees, names, identity of that, of how, like the ending of a family tree and what that means and how that resonates. Yeah.
Well, I'm the last woman on this specific line of my family tree, because actually my aunt had 2 sons who each had a boy.
Okay,
And then
cool.
my brother has also had 1 boy.
Yeah.
So I'm the last female to have come out of that lineage, which feels sort of doubly
Potent
and doubly meaningful, actually, when I then think about what has been passed down the lineage of mothers, of women and mothers in my family. I mean, honestly, it's been a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And so it wasn't that I found comfort, but I found some additional meaning in this orientation when I considered that some part of me potentially has decided that this stops with me.
Yeah.
You know, and that I am not going to take on board the suffering that my foremothers experienced. I'm going to end that in my life, and I'm going to live my life on my terms, with agency.
Yeah.
And in pursuit of the things that bring me joy and fulfillment.
And that's so
For me, that doesn't mean children.
Yeah. And that's so potent and so powerful around that commitment to that ending. Like, I just want to honor that in you, like to make that, you know, to make that decision and know it and write about it and create a movement and a community around it. Like, that is like the ultimate, as we say in our family, like give it death, like going all in on something. We use the phrase give it death. So
I see, like the opposite of give it life. Like really consciously bring it to a close.
Yeah, really bring it to a close and give it death. Like before sports races or things when I was younger, my mum used to always say, like, go give it death.
I love that. I've never heard that expression before.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense that you would be drawn to this subject.
Completely. And I found it really interesting earlier what you shared about community and knowing that you're not alone, and that that's something that's really come out of this process for you, is the understanding that you're not alone in this and there is a community. I was at the London event of the book launch, and oh my gosh, the energy was just palpable in the room. And I know that you said it was the same in New York too, where it did feel like women from all ages, from, you know, mid-20s to, 60 plus in the room, all sharing, experiences and reasons and decisions and situations. And it felt really a bit of a secret society at the top of
We were in the very top of a very multi-story, well, it was a rickety old kind of building in Soho. We were right up in the attic, and it felt like a gathering. It truly felt like a gathering of witches, like in the best possible way. It was really, and I think I said then that, like, it feels like with this project, I've been doing something dangerous. And on the surface, I was sort of thinking, wow, am I like these sort of pronatalist scaremongering around population decline and like, what's at risk if more and more people continue to have fewer kids. I was sort of thinking, gosh, am I afraid that I'm going to inspire people not to have children and somehow bring about the end of the human race, talking about things that die, But actually, no, I realized that what feels scary about it is I'm touching on the collective fear of women having full agency and sovereignty over our power and our resources. Because so much of women's power and resource has traditionally been expected to be channeled into child rearing, Yeah. And when we choose or are unable to do that, we have all of our power and all of our resource at our disposal to channel into whatever we choose. That poses a huge threat, actually, to the patriarchal and sort of heavily gendered status quo that we're still very much living within. And so when I was thinking about this feels like a dangerous subject, I'm picking up on the collective fear of, this unbridled female power, feminine power, sort of being directed outside of the home, out into society, out into public life. Because I think there's huge potential in that.
Yeah, definitely. Like death of death of the identity of woman as we know it, or the death of identity as mother as we know it, and death of stereotypes of this is what you do in your 20s, this is what you do in your 30s, this is what you do in your 40s. Like, it's really being pulled down on so many levels, whether it's not choosing to have kids, or women, working in different ways for longer time, different ways we earn money. Like, there's so many things, there's so many different systems that are crumbling around this time that's connected to that. And as you say, the women choosing not to sign up to what's expected, or what is deemed successful, as in you're only successful if you have, you have it all. Like, you have the kids, you have the career, you do the things. Like, it's massive right now. And it's a real death, crumbling of the identity of what's expected of us.
Exactly. It's a death of the old binary gendered sort of paradigm that says women are the nurturing caretakers and men are the competitive, striving providers. That's all falling apart. That's all up for question.
Yeah.
And it is the death of a paradigm in a way. And of course, with any death comes fear. Yeah.
And you talk about that in the book, around the fear of death. And does that mean that we, this desire to create legacy, and what is legacy? As in, like, is legacy just the traditional, like, having kids and that's our legacy, that, they can, our genes are the legacy, or the memories of ourselves that live through them are, is the legacy? And do we pursue legacy just because of a fear of death?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. Someone asked this question at the New York book launch. She said, I am my parents' only child, and I am the last person who bears my surname. And I have got pressure from them around that theme, like, who will carry on the family name? What should I do? What can I say to them? And I hadn't given it enough thought to give her a good answer in the session, but I was thinking about it a lot afterwards. And I wanted to advise her to ask them why this is so important. Why is it so important that our name lives on? Because I think actually what would be uncovered in that conversation is a fear that once we are gone, we are gone.
Yeah, and forgotten.
Within that is the fear of death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's isn't it interesting? It's that whole is it 2 generations on, like, will probably be forgotten. Like,
I remember the first time I sat in like I did a red tent session, which is all around sort of healing shame around menstruation, and the opening of the session, which is sort of commonish, I suppose, in spiritual circles. We were asked to introduce ourselves and name our mother and our grandmother.
Yeah.
I couldn't name beyond my grandmother. Like I don't know my great-grandmother's names. I know nothing about my ancestors going back more than 2 generations, parents and grandparents. Know nothing about, I have since then actually done a little bit of digging, but there's very little information out there.
Yeah.
And if it goes back beyond sort of great-grandparents, then just forget about it. So we will be forgotten eventually, regardless of whether we have children. However, in the chapter on legacy in the book, I called it An Other Legacy. And I remind readers and myself that actually every action we take, every interaction we have with another human being creates its own kind of legacy in terms of how they may be impacted and change their thoughts, beliefs, actions, or be inspired to act, etc., as a result of our interactions with them, which I think is a really, I don't know, it's just, to me, there's not comfort in that, but I think it really makes me feel a lot more intentional about how I live my life now while I'm here, rather than worrying about who's going to carry the torch for me after I'm gone. But how do I live my life while I am here so that my actions and the impact of my actions, my words, my creations, etc., live on in the actions of others, you know?
Yeah.
And in the beliefs of others and in the lived experience of others.
Yeah.
That to me is a really powerful sort of, awakening, or just a reminder, I suppose, about how this is actually the only life where we get to have a physical impact on this earthly plane. So how are we living our lives today, this week, this month?
Yeah.
And what kind of an impact are we having right now, versus worrying about, well, who's going to survive me in 30, 40 years when I'm gone, you know?
Completely. And knowing and trusting, as you say, that energetic transference, that energy, you know, interaction, that connection, that love, that, you know, act of kindness, that, you know, and that exchange, that human exchange is just as important as creating another life.
Absolutely. Creating, rather than focusing on creating more new lives, how can we invest more of our power, energy, resource, love in the life that is already here, in the life that we're already living as individuals, but in the life that is coursing through the other individuals that we know, that we encounter with our work and our relationships, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I think that's, I don't know, I find I'm really inspired by that idea.
Do you think that you were drawn to the career in journalism, writing books, helping other people write books? Do you think that you were subconsciously, you know, obviously it's one of your innate gifts, skills and talents, but do you think that that is also part of that, you know, inner child, that moment where you're like, no, I'm not going to have children. This doesn't feel right. I'm not interested in this. But again, that, you know, that fueling of the fire of that fear of death and that legacy piece of like, well, shit, what am I leaving behind? Do you think sometimes that, you know, that inner child of you is like, okay, I've got to leave something of me behind?
I don't think so. No, I've just always, quite confidently, and I can credit my parents for seeding this confidence in me. I've always been just confident about pursuing what I'm interested in and what inspires me and what lights me up, and writing and books have always been that for me. It was really only after Sober Curious had the kind of impact that it did that I started thinking about my books as creating some kind of a legacy, purely because I was getting so many messages and continue to get so many messages from people just saying, and it sounds like grandiose in a way, but literally saying, you've saved my life, you've changed my life. I'm completely, you know, I feel completely different about alcohol. I've been able to completely reframe the way I drink. My life is unrecognizable to before. This is huge, hearing this from people. It's very galvanizing, and it made me actually think about my work, think about the responsibility that comes from doing the kind of work that I do, actually.
Yeah.
And really wanting to be in full integrity with the work that I put out, knowing the potential impact that it can have in people's lives, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I have been starting to get similar messages by people who are reading Women Without Kids. Just lots of thank you for helping me see this differently, for helping me understand myself, for helping me feel less alone. Like, this stuff sounds really cheesy to say this is why I do what I do, and honestly, it's not. Actually, I do what I do to earn a living. I'm very like, I write books to make money. Like, this is what I can do, and like, this is how I earn a living. And hearing those messages makes me, like I said, realize the responsibility that comes with pursuing this as a career, and from having a platform and getting published and being able to like impact people's lives in this way, you know? So it's the kind of it's fuel, I suppose, for times when it feels really hard and really challenging, and when there are all sorts of blocks to getting the message out there. It's a difficult career path to pursue, and I think that actually, had I had children, I wouldn't have been able to pursue this career, because it's very unstable, it's very uncertain, there's no regular paycheck, you really have to be on all the time, you've got to be uber self-starting and ambitious. And if I had had children, I don't think I'd have had the energy to be able to pursue the author career that I have.
Yeah, go you for listening. Hey, and as you say, like job done. Like if you want to be in that kind of spiritual, like what's the soul's learning in this lifetime? What was the learning? It's like job done. Like listen to yourself, do what's right, follow your dreams, share what's important, be authentic, and you're ticking every single box, Ruby. So, high fives.
And I'm so grateful that as a female-bodied individual, I've been born at a time and in a culture where that has been an option for me,
True.
For my mother's generation, things were starting to change. For her mother's generation, and certainly for going back, down the ancestry, to have this kind of a career, meaning a life where I can have this kind of an impact in public life, has been the preserve of a very, very small minority of women. So I just feel so incredibly grateful that I actually had the option to pursue what feels the most important to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and honoring that. And I love the fact that you used the word responsibility as well, that there's a responsibility, because isn't it interesting that sometimes it could be a projection from other people who have kids, that women who don't have kids don't have responsibilities.
Right. Right.
So it's kind of like that flip side where it's like, hang on a second, that bringing it back to that legacy piece and like what's left behind when you die. Actually, the energy of responsibility that you're putting in this like living form, again, like transcends time. It transcends everything, because you're doing that responsibly, like now. Like that's really,
There's
really
a
potent.
responsibility that comes with any endeavor that impacts public life. Politicians have a huge responsibility, corporations have a huge responsibility, and many of them do not approach their impact in a responsible way. Being an author has a huge responsibility. There's a term that came up in my research, cultural parent, and I can really, really identify with that, especially as I get older myself. And I'm of the age when a lot of people are in the real kind of weeds of parenting, I feel the responsibility of being a cultural parent. That said, I'm currently in my nephew's bedroom because I'm staying with my brother for a couple of weeks actually in Berlin. And tomorrow morning, they co-parent, he and his ex-wife. So he's got my nephew for the next few days, and tomorrow morning he'll be up and he'll be taking him to school, and I won't be going with them. So there's the daily responsibilities of just caregiving to a small human being, which are huge and innumerable and never ending, and a huge time suck, and prevent us from doing other things that we want to be doing with our lives. So there is a huge responsibility that comes with parenting, but it's on a kind of incremental day-to-day scale. And sometimes I think when people say that parents are non-parents are irresponsible, mixed in there is some resentment actually for the level of responsibility that falls oftentimes to individuals, specifically mothers, in the way that people parent in nuclear families and these very kind of siloed, individualistic family structures. Whereas, back when we were sort of like living closer to our tribal roots, there would have been multiple adults on hand to take on some of those day-to-day responsibilities and roles. Exactly. And I think that sometimes parents are so irresponsible. There's some resentment in there that so much of the day-to-day responsibility of child rearing often falls unfairly and unsustainably on too few people in the household.
Yeah. And it used to be a bigger community and a wider family role that was what was done. I know it was in my family when my mum and my grandfather and my nan and my aunt came back from Canada in the 60s. When they came back, they lived with my aunt and uncle for a while, and they all lived together, and I'm sure that my aunt and uncle would have helped out, and it's a different, as you said, it's a different kind of setup to where it is where it is now, as you say, where the pressure is on to, I don't know, just from looking at my friends who are parents of, I mean, I don't have children myself. There's a lot of pressure to be a good parent. There's a lot of pressure not to fuck it up.
Yeah. And to really be on call 24/7, you know. And these are, you know, people who do have jobs and people who have to work because one income is not going to be enough to support a family. If you're an independent parent and you're doing it on your own, then it really does fall to you. Obviously, there are many cultures around the world where intergenerational living is still very much the norm.
Yeah.
But it's not always preferred. People enjoy their privacy. People enjoy having their own household where they get to make the rules, you know? So on the one hand, this sort of drive towards more individualistic households has been answering that need. But it has made it much harder to parent, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I know that, from speaking to friends that have parents, they're pulled in every single which direction, you know, all the time. And I think
some people have a much bigger capacity for that as well. You know, some people, like my brother, for example, he's a real people person. He likes doing stuff with people all the time, and he always has. Like when we were kids, I'd always be in my room with a book, and he would always be with a group of friends playing games.
Yeah.
And this was like if we went on holiday, my dad would take us camping every year in Yorkshire camping.
Sounds grim.
But I would be in the tent reading a book, and my brother would have befriended everybody in the campsite and be off on having adventures. And that's just differences in our personalities, which, you know, it's one small insight into a man is much more suited to the role of parenting, which is sort of by nature a group activity in a way, you know, even if it's just you and the child. He's much more suited to that role than I am, who has always been a loner, who has always been highly introverted, and who needs actually a lot of alone time to process everything that I'm streaming and absorbing, and because I'm a highly sensitive person, Natalie, and so I need a lot of quiet time to process it all. Or I can spin out really, really quickly.
And again, like, go you for knowing that and listening to that and being in and understanding that that's like part of how you're made up, because so many people then just think, well, I'm just going to try and do it all, and then it
exactly. And then when it becomes overwhelming, well, there's something wrong with me because I can't do this right. Well, actually, maybe your needs aren't actually being met. You know. No, it's really, really potent in what you're sharing in that. How do you feel as we're talking? You know, the book's out. You know, the press and the PR has been amazing on the book. You've been getting lots of traction on it. How does it feel now that it's the kind of death of the creative project as such? Like, how are you feeling in that weird bardo space? Gosh. How's it feel? Well, like to the hour of finishing the last two kind of podcasts I had scheduled. Well, actually, I rescheduled this one, so I did have other scheduled last week, but I had two that I sort of couldn't reschedule because they were like in person in Berlin, and literally that night I just developed this terrible sore throat, and it just was like something was going, no more talking. No, be quiet. You can't talk about this anymore. Because like people, yes, there have been lots of podcast interviews. There's been lots of media hits. For everything that you're seeing about the book out in the world, there's been about 10 other requests or pitches or conversations had, you know? So it's been like the past 6 months of just sort of constant push out energy. And and so last week I just completely crashed and burned. My head filled up with snot. Could barely think straight, and I just developed a really, really bad cold, which it just felt it was like classic kind of burnout response. Burnout, and I guess I've experienced this with my other books too, a kind of a postpartum lull, a sort of like, is that it?
Yeah.
And just this huge, I've been running on so much adrenaline for so long. Just feeling that ebb out of my body has felt like a low. It feels like a low, even though I'm still basking in and so happy for all of the conversations that have been had. The launch events were all amazing. I've definitely been feeling a bit low as a result of that part of the process coming to an end.
Yeah, makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, as you, and especially with it being such a big topic as well, like wondering like how it's going to be received. Are you going to get like loads of backlash? Are you going to be fielding the social media comments with particular types of people asking things? Like, yeah, that's a lot. And so no wonder the body has just kind of gone, and stop.
I mean, there hasn't been a huge amount of backlash, which I think is interesting, maybe as it gets out into the wider world and out of my own sort of curated networks where people have opted in to be hearing about this and are very much on the wavelength. Maybe there'll be more. I'm not actually that concerned about it. But even just because it's such a big subject, every podcast interview, of which there've been, I mean, probably not hundreds yet, but a lot, has gone super deep.
Yeah.
And so like, there's been no skimming on the surface, but that's what I want with this book, because it's such a deep subject, and conversations about being child-free tend to be quite surface and shallow, which is why I've never really found what I've been looking for in those spaces before, which is one of the reasons I wanted to write the book, because I really wanted to draw attention, I suppose, to what an incredibly important, deep and impactful decision it is to have a child or not to have a child, particularly taking into account all of the kind of external forces that are shaping our experienes around that.
Yeah. Yeah, no small things. You don't pick small topics, Ruby.
Well, I don't know. Material Girl, Mystical World, my first book, was kind of pretty light and fluffy by comparison.
Yeah,
but
no, it
even
is.
that, I remember my publisher being like, "Wow, this is so much more. This is so much deeper than we were anticipating." But to me, it reads really light and fluffy comparatively. But I think, I mean, I have for astrology fans out there, I have Pluto, which is the planet of life, death, rebirth on my midheaven. This is the planet which brings about, insists, enforces our evolutionary processes. And in every evolution into our new and next phase, something must die. And so Pluto has that life and death. Like, this is a life and death matter energy about it. And it's right on my midheaven, which is the line of my career. It's also trining my Mars in Cancer. And I think actually that's why this book of all my books feels the most aligned in a way for who I really am and what I really believe. Because Mars in Cancer, Mars is passion, activism, energy, fight, I suppose. Cancer is the sign of mothering.
And the
feminine
home and
the
nurturing.
home. And so I think that I've really felt my sort of inner activist be ignited by this project, which I suppose, if anything, as the conversations are rolling out, I'm feeling a little frustrated that still the book has been sort of roundly and widely ignored by the bigger, more establishment publications and organisations. And I think this is still seen as quite a sort of like, I don't know, not fluffy, but inconsequential, like trivial, fringe conversation, you know? And the real conversations, the really important feminist stuff is about motherhood.
Yeah.
Well, actually, non-motherhood is the kind of the mirror of that conversation. When non-mothers are either opting out or unable to become mothers, and that's like the whole huge, actually shadow taboo part of the conversation about motherhood. So I'm hoping that some of the bigger sort of more establishment outlets will pick this conversation up and take it as
100%.
seriously as I do.
Yeah, I know.
Said, like,
and no, it does feel like that. It really does, especially as politically things are going to get way more intense and this year build up to 2024. Again, it feels like, do you know, well, you know, when you write a book and then you know that you're preempting and you're talking about something before it intensifies, that the book's out there, and then, you know, it just feels like you're going to be, you know, that activist in you, Ruby, is going to be sharing more about this. It just feels like this is the start of something.
This is quite interesting. So like I've kind of looked for child-free or childless role models in a way throughout my life. They've been few and far between, and there are more and more coming through. But it was always like Oprah. And for me, Oprah is kind of like my numinous phase role model. Yeah. My new one is Gloria Steinem. Yeah. And I'm like, that's my feminist activist phase childless role model. Gloria is an Aries. So I definitely feel an affinity with her and her work.
I love it. Yeah, it just feels like there's more of this to come. And it's, as you were talking about death and endings, I had a question. How do you like to honor the death and endings in your own life? Like when you end a project or something ends or you're facing big endings, is there things that you like to do that bring you joy to celebrate the death or the ending?
Wow, I think I'm actually really bad at it. I tend to kind of keep things going or draw things out for way beyond their done date, way beyond their sell by date.
Yeah.
I have been known to sort of, you know, ritualistically throw various talismans into various rivers around New York. London, rivers. New York particularly. In a sort of symbolic, it's the end of that phase kind of thing. But I mean, just today, Natalie, and I don't know if it's because I knew we'd be having this conversation subconsciously, but I was really getting hits of like, it's time to just close down the Numinous Instagram account. Like, I'm not really doing anything there. It hasn't really been active. It hasn't really been getting traction. Everything's happening at Ruby Warrington. Why do I still, and part of me is having a really hard time letting it go, because that was such a huge part of my life and work and identity, exactly. But then there's a really strong pull in me to just be like, it's done, that phase has passed and we've evolved into something else now. So I don't know, maybe vocalizing it here will help me take that step. And I do think that if I do decide to kind of close that Instagram account down, I probably should do something to honor that passing
phase. Yeah, exactly. And it's that whole when we release the energetic container of what has been in the past, and it actually gets that place, that energy to close up, the energy's then got somewhere else to go. Like the new energy can come into, like, there'll be more energy towards the Ruby Warrington. It'll be more towards Women Out Without Kids. It's like you're not leaving the crack of the door open, and it's like, okay, exactly. Like let's go all in on this, like new phase, new chapter, and like really honor the death of what was, and see it as like, like that was amazing. That was an amazing time of life, but it's kind of like, okay, it's done.
Which feels like a good cycle. And so it sounds kind of frivolous to be talking about this with regards to an Instagram account, but actually for so many of us, that has become a place where we've really created and shaped our identities, and where we've been able to, you know, bring our work into the world. And it's not actually frivolous at all. It's hugely important. And I see so many people at this kind of stage in the evolution of social media wrestling with this. How do I evolve my platform to truly reflect who I am now, what I'm working on now, what I want to bring forward?
Yeah.
And I think it's very difficult for people because, you know, building a personal brand can feel very constricting, and actually it can be very hard to evolve our personal brands in a way that feels respectful, relevant, and that works, honestly.
Yeah.
So actually I feel like sometimes starting afresh is kind of cleaner and the better option.
Yeah. It's like, isn't it? Because then there's that projection of then how other people see you when you've had a death of the self, like, you know, in a completely different way off, you know, what is offline as such. And then it's like then matching the energy of what is offline online, and having, as you say, that confidence to be, you know, especially, you know, bringing it back to the book. And you talk about this on a legacy piece of like what you're creating and what does that look like, that feeds into the, well, hang on a second, the numinous is part of my you know, it's part of the legacy. Right. And if you're not using it, like, well, hang on a second, does that like lower its impact in some way? And you know it doesn't.
But it's kind of like I think as well, when something dies creatively, it can feel like it's failed. When actually we as creators know that it's evolved into something else. It hasn't failed. It's actually just become something else, especially when it's a really personal project. So I think viewing this less as a failure and more just a natural transition into this next new phase, it's helping me even as I'm speaking it out. And I'm hoping any other sort of conscious creators or culture creators are potentially resonating with this as well. Like, it's not a failure when something ends. It just represents an evolution of myself, my work, etc. And that is actually a natural process. Like, all of nature goes through these processes of life, death, and rebirth.
Yeah. No, it's important. No, thank you for sharing where you're at with that. Because, you know, it's funny because earlier I was, you know, I've got loads of old workshops and things that are still on my website. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to take them down. Like, they don't feel like me anymore. Like, they feel like old. And again, that like, let's create the space for what's new and honoring that. And it feels it, you know, it's all the change, all the transformation. And
this is about like our maturation as creators as well. I think, like, I don't know, the term arrested development kind of came up in this blog post I was reading earlier, and it was sort of about how in our society we don't really have let alone rituals for rites of passage, but like, we're not really encouraged to mature. We fetishize youth and youthfulness to the extent that we can get stuck in this kind of arrested development, like where we stop actually growing and maturing because we believe that like our most potent self is our like youthful self or whatever it is. And so it's just making me think about that, like thinking about having these old courses and old offerings on a website as kind of an arrested development in a way.
And then that brings it back to the book, because you talk about that in the book again around, you know, the older that you get, the more unseen that you become, like the less seen that you are, and you become, you know, especially if you haven't got kids, that it's that whole like, you know, you're the old cat lady in the house, and
exactly. There are very few role models for powerful elder women. There just aren't very many, because our elder women didn't have the opportunity to really kind of use their power, as I was discussing, in a kind of way that is visible, is impactful, you know? So I think that tide is turning rapidly, actually. Like I said, there are so many more childless elder women role models coming through all the time, and it's so exciting to witness that.
Yeah, really exciting. It will become the norm. It won't be, you know, unexpected. It'll just be, and it won't be made a big deal out of either, I think, as well. It'll just be like part of, do you know what I mean? Like part of society. It won't be such a big you know, when it's not a big topic anymore and it's not needs to be discussed, it'll be really interesting, you know, for the next generation or the generation after, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, that's just how it was, versus it being this stigma or evolution of the self of where it is and what it looks like. It's fascinating.
It
is. There was something that you wrote in your book and it made me smile, and I wanted to ask you the questions. I don't know why I wanted to do this. But you wrote in your book, you said, talking about death, and you said, turning the corner of midlife had also found me looking at my own mortality in the face, the feeling as I contemplated how my final days would play out, like finishing a novel and finding a blank page where the ending was supposed to be. To whom would I leave my raggedy collection of paperbacks and vintage designer shoes? Who would carry out my instructions about what to do with my body? If I even had a funeral, who would even read my eulogy? So I wanted to ask you, who do you think is going to read your eulogy, Ruby? Who are you giving you?
No fucking idea. I mean, what immediately came to mind is Vivienne Westwood died last year. I've always felt an affinity with her. We shared the same birthday. And she, similar to me, was kind of a rebel, I think, and somebody who really confronted societal norms and shook things up in that way. She did have a child, I think maybe 2 children actually, but her, you know, she also had a very hot Austrian husband who was at least 25 years her junior.
Go Viv.
And her funeral was obviously, you know, just attended by every move and shaker in London, and the tributes poured out worldwide. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to have as spectacular or visible or kind of like glamorous a career as Vivienne Westwood, but her children weren't necessarily front and centre of the tributes that were made and the reminiscences that were had. And I'm happily married to my husband of 24 years. He is a bit older than me, and not often, but you know, this midlife thing is real. Like, I've been thinking a lot more about death. You just do. I think it's maybe even a biological thing. After you hit 40, you just kind of, oh yeah, I'm gonna die. It's gonna happen. Kind of in denial up to that point. But whenever I say to him, because he's a bit older, statistically he'll probably die before I do. What am I going to do without you? What am I going to do without you? He always instantly replies, you'll have a toy boy husband within a couple of months. And it's a joke, but there's something in me that's kind of like, oh, maybe I will.
I'm going to go like Vivienne.
Who knows? But I mean, joking aside, I don't know. One thing that I really came away from this book feeling was a strong desire and reminder, I suppose, of how important it is to invest in my friendships, and all my relationships. Actually, you know, it's made me want to be a much better auntie. It's made me want to be a much better friend, and I can only hope that, with conscious effort on my part, these friendships and other relationships will stand the test of time, and that there will be people in my life who care about me when I'm, you know, breathing my final breaths. Yeah. But again, who knows? Who knows? It might be me on my own in a care home, one of the 60% of people in care homes who never receive any visitors. Who knows?
It's a crazy stat.
I can't. Again, another thing that I've become very clear about is I'm really concerned with making decisions that are going to impact my life today, this week, this month, and spend less of my time worrying about what's going to be happening in 20, 30, 40 years' time. Because, well, you're a psychic medium, but none of us truly knows what the future holds. No, right? And even your work is less focused on future tripping and predictions, and much more on what's present right now and important right now. And I think for anyone who's feeling the kind of existential FOMO of like, will I miss out by not having kids? Will I not experience real love? Will I be lonely? Will I regret it? If you're worried about missing out on experiencing love, if you're feeling lonely, if you're worried about regretting things, what can you do today that's going to bring you more love, that's going to ensure that you don't regret missing out on something this week or not doing something this week, you know? If you're lonely, how can you reach out to someone now and remedy that, you know? So, yeah, I've just been feeling that quite strongly as well. Yeah. But the fear of death is real. I think it's part of being human.
Completely. So. Yeah, very much so. There's one question I've been asking everyone that comes on the podcast. When, you know, it always gets said that when we're passing over, that we get to, you know, our life is going to flash before our eyes, and we're going to have those moments that, you know, that come up. Who or what do you think will be part of your last memories or the thoughts that you have before you pass? If you were going to reflect on it now, of like where you are today, who, what, how, and I know there's probably too many things to mention, but I always find it really interesting to see like what flashes up as like the thing that comes up, of that moment.
I have no idea, because the mind, the imagination, the psyche, whatever, is so unpredictable. I mean, it's like asking me, what am I going to dream about tonight?
Yeah.
It's going to be wild. It'll be wild. I have no idea. I mean, the immediate, people that come to mind are my husband, my brother, my nephew, like my parents, because these are the closest relationships, most intimate relationships I've had with people. Dear friends, but I don't know. It could be the most random things.
Exactly. Isn't it weird that do you know, when you like, you're meditating and like random stuff pops in, or random memories pop in? That's why I'm like, isn't it? And I sometimes then think, is that because of like films or books or, or TV shows where we're shown what we think that will look like, with like memories flashing
exactly
forward,
like a photo
like
album,
a picture,
kind of like going through. I imagine it'll be everything I've stored in my subconscious that needs to be known before, needs to be conscious before I lose consciousness forever. So that is unknowable. It's numinous. That is the stuff that comes out in our dreams, isn't it? Like all those unconscious influences that have actually made me who I am, that I wasn't aware of having had that much influence on me at the time. I don't know. I imagine it being something a bit more like that, like more like an ayahuasca trip or something.
That's what I mean? Exactly. And also then bringing it back to, like you saying, those acts of kindness, that energy transfer. It's those things. It's those reflections on those moments where you made,
I'd love to be shown. I'd love to be shown a montage of all people reading my books, having aha moments and like feeling so seen and like. I'd love that, obviously, like a kind of Oscars best bits kind of.
I love it. I can so see that. Thanks, Ruby. This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you for sharing. And go and if you're listening to this, Women Without Kids, it's amazing. Well done, Ruby. And it's, not just for women who don't have kids, it's for women, anyone that doesn't have kids. It's not just specifically for women without kids. I want to share that.
Right. It's for anybody who identifies as a woman without kids, but I've actually had loads of mums read it and tell me how much they love it, because it has helped them stay connected to or reconnect to the woman that they are without their kids. I think that's a huge missing piece as well, that it's actually okay to not, even as a mother, want to be defined entirely by your role as a mother. And I think I've had a lot of mums thanking me for giving them permission for that piece as well.
Yeah, that's massive.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Ruby.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm so excited for your new project. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks.